Russia has already lost more than 5,840 tanks in Ukraine, and the enemy also has about 3,000 tanks in the combat zone. At first glance, Russia's tank potential is inexhaustible and it is constantly recovering. But this is only at first glance. At the time of the full-scale invasion, according to various estimates, Russia had between 3,300 and 3,600 tanks in service. In 2 years, Ukrainian forces have destroyed almost twice as many tanks as Russia had in service before the full-scale invasion. At the same time, it was able to maintain a strike capability that roughly corresponds to its initial performance. Today, there is no full-scale serial production of tanks in Russia, only small-scale assembly of the T-90, not exceeding 60 tanks per year. Russia does not produce tanks, but mainly restores them. And such tanks are practically more than 90% of the number of tanks sent to the war zone every month. To fully understand the numbers, let's look at how many tanks were being restored in Russia before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. A record number of tanks were restored and transferred to Russian forces in 2019, 434 units. At the same time, some of these tanks did not even undergo additional modernization, but were immediately sent to the troops. In 2020, Russian troops received 300 tanks, and in 2021, 170. Russia had no full-fledged serial production of tanks, and the maximum potential for peacetime deliveries was about 36 tanks per month. In fact, Russia's entire tank industry now depends on the potential it inherited from the USSR. But how big is this potential and how long will it last? Russia inherited tens of thousands of tanks of various models and modifications from the USSR. But after decades of storage and restoration, not all of them are repairable. Nevertheless, the indicative figures remain high enough to provide compensation for the losses of Russian troops in the next at least 2 years and amounts to 5,100 tanks. For convenience, I have gathered everything in a small table. If the same rate of destruction continues in 2024, the potential for compensation of losses at the level of 200 tanks per month, or 2,400 per year, will be insufficient, and the reserve of equipment itself will be reduced by 50%. But importantly, the quality and generations of tanks being rebuilt will degrade more and more each time. When officials in Russia talk about the long-term perspective of the war against Ukraine, they are blatantly lying. Only human resources can provide them with a long-term perspective, while technical resources are inevitably depleted. At present, Russia's losses in equipment in many nomenclature items will never be replenished, and tanks belong to this category. The remnants of the Soviet heritage are being squandered in convulsions and thirst to achieve some kind of victory, some kind of result. But there will come a moment of complete exhaustion of this potential, and then Russia will be completely dependent on its own limited production or supplies from other countries, which will not be able to provide it at the level it needs to fight a full-scale war. But for now, Russia is still able to compensate for the loss of tanks on its own.